Hi, everybody. My name is Buddy Gott. Welcome to today's episode of Gotta Pop. On this show, I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite musical acts ever, and that is Daryl Hall and John Oates. I've been a fan for a long time, and my guest has also been a fan for a long time, and my guest is a great guy named Dave Legates. Welcome to the show, Dave.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy.
Oh, my
And
pleasure. I'll just tell my viewers and listeners how we met, and that was actually in a Hall and Oates fan group back on Yahoo, which
mhm,
was at least 20 years ago. I know in
maybe
2003
more.
I was in there. I think it was a little more than that,
Hmm.
and I don't know how many people remember those groups, but they were a pretty popular thing back in the
They
day.
were those groups, yeah, and the Yahoo News groups kind of thing that would be, and you would just get an email reminder of what the latest message was. It was pretty barbaric in 2023 terms, but
Very.
back then it was, yeah, but back then it was the way to go,
It
and yeah,
was.
and it got very lively. It was, we had,
Yeah,
you
we
know.
met in one group that another guy had run, and then I started up one. I think you ran it
Hmm.
for a while with me. Or I remember, then
Yeah.
Susan Wright was with us
Susan was with
running,
us.
and
Yeah.
a whole bunch of other people whose names I can't remember now. But
Me
yet it got
neither.
lively. I mean, we would get into talks about albums, and
Yeah.
and if they were on tour, we'd talk about that, and
Yeah.
people get into favorite and least favorite songs, and sometimes that would get
Right.
into a debate. There's
Right. You never knew how it was going to spin. I mean, one day to the next, it could take off on a different it could take off on a different tangent out of nowhere. But it was interesting that way, and there were some real characters for sure.
there were definitely a lot of characters. And well, I don't think I have to really tell anybody who's listening or watching this who Daryl Hall and John Oates are. They are,
I
I
heard
would
of
think, the most successful musical duo ever. I know Simon and Garfunkel
them.
may have held that title for a while, but
Yeah.
if they're not the most, they're one of the most successful.
Yeah, yeah. I think in terms of chart success and as far as sales success, but I would say they match up both of them. So yeah, they probably are the most popular for sure, the biggest of all time.
Yeah, and I've run into in the places I write music articles online, which is mostly on medium.com. I'll see younger writers and readers there who are just in their early 20s, and almost everyone knows something like Maneater from the 80s. I think
It's
the younger
heartwarming, isn't
generation
it?
is most familiar with those songs, probably, and maybe a handful from the 70s.
It's all right. I mean, what they know, if they know anything at all, it's heartwarming. I mean, it really is to know that we've passed something on to the next generation, that embraces them, and they continue to grow an audience, through the years. You go to a Hall and Oates show today, and it's a huge demographic. I mean, you would be shocked at who's there, who knows the songs. Um, and it's really a nice environment for sure. If you see one, it's tremendous.
Yeah, it is. And I've seen both Daryl and John talk about their audiences and how, it's a thrill for them to see even grandparents there with their grandchildren at the
Hey,
shows,
right.
which is understandable because, I mean, their first album, we're going to go through, we're going to cover, just to let people know what we're doing. We talked about the fact that we wanted to talk about Hall and Oates, but we figured we would focus on the 1970s because
Yeah, just
the 1980s is when they hit it big on MTV, and that brought them to a whole new level of fame that they had not experienced quite to that degree in the 70s,
oh,
even though they'd already been recording for like 10 years before MTV came around.
right. And these songs are really, you know, they went through the trials and tribulations of Hall and Oates the first 10 years. Fans think it was a very instantaneous, thing for them. It was far from it. It
Far
was a
from it.
lot. Yeah, it was a real toiling project through those first 10 years, trying to define them, trying to define their sound. Really a true bottom up, searching for yourself kind of thing. They really had to tiptoe into finding their what was the Hall and Oates sound,
They
and
really did. And that's for, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Dave.
oh no, it's fine.
It's for multiple reasons too, because
Hmm.
they had
Yes.
problems with record labels. They had switched
Hmm.
labels after their first, I think,
Hmm.
three albums, and then of
Yep.
course they were switching the musicians that they played with. A lot of times they had to deal with studio
Producers switch.
musicians, yeah,
Yeah.
producers, and well, you know
All
what?
that we'll get to, I'm sure. Yeah, that's one of
Yeah,
those
well,
things
well,
that
why don't we
plays
start with the
into this.
first
Yeah.
album then?
Sure, we'll go to good old Whole Oates from
Good old whole.
1972.
That's
Um,
right.
yep. Atlantic signs the boys, okay, to their first record deal. They had already they had already gotten taken by another producer
Oh
who
yeah,
made a
that's right.
bootleg. Yeah, but Whole Oates is their first official. Atlantic signs them, and they assign the great Arif Mardin to their to produce them the first time around. And he struggles finding who they are. I mean,
Yes.
yeah, right away he's a little confused by them, but they brought some old songs with them and what have you. And it's interesting because there's a for guys who prided themselves on a Motown kind of thing, it was a little it was also a little country, a little bluegrass, a little bit of everything mixed into it. It was quite a fusion of different things.
It
And
really was. There was, like you said, there's a little bit of everything on there, and you had some rock and roll on there. But
mhm,
and what I love about some of those first albums by them is they've always been partners. But I think especially back then, they wrote more songs together,
yeah,
and you heard a little bit more of John Oates back then, not
yes,
just
you
in
did.
lead vocals, but they did a lot of back and forth in the harmonies on
Hmm.
songs, and you hear that right from the beginning on the opening track, "I'm Sorry," which is one of my favorite songs
Yeah,
on the album. There's
is
some
yeah,
good songs on this album. There's really, I
really good
actually,
songs.
yeah, I one of the first things I wrote on Medium, it was probably about 2 years ago, was an article just on this album, and probably a lot of the music listening public isn't familiar with this. There's very little of this that
No,
gets played on the radio.
no,
One that I knew from the radio before I owned the album was only because of where I live. I live in northern Delaware, which is about 30 minutes from Philadelphia. And there's a song on here, a great slow song called Fall in Philadelphia. And
yeah,
inevitably, when September rolled around every year, you'd hear at least one of the stations in Philly
really,
playing this
yeah.
song regularly.
The funny thing about Fall in Philadelphia is that it's kind of a credo song of Hall and Oates. It's one of those songs that fans wrap themselves around and totally embrace because we know the story, okay,
Hmm.
behind it, and we understand, this is what one of the things they were going through. They were living in beat down places. They were living in, rather, rather rough environments for sure. And but it's kind of a song that's it's almost hard to share with a run of the mill Hall and Oates fan or a non regular fan. It's one of those songs that really the fans have taken to heart through the years, and we sort of keep
Yes.
it to ourselves in a way. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah,
It's not shared well. It doesn't share well, and and
that's
so
true. Now, when I've tried to share some of these songs with some people,
yeah,
they'll be like, "Oh, that's nice," and they might like it
yeah,
a little bit. But
right,
I think like the first couple albums, probably a good chunk of the stuff that came out in the '70s. It's the diehards are the ones who just love it, and yeah, it might be harder for others to latch onto. But I think if the people gave the things a chance, I think they'd fall in love with
right.
it.
Well, I think that as time went on, especially, I mean, I think about how like a lot of people I know who are genuine people who define themselves as rockers or even a Grateful Dead kind of fan or what have you, would embrace these songs a little bit better than say what the 80s became. And that's kind of when people think of Hall and Oates, that's what they think of. But if they
Hmm.
had heard these songs, I think their opinion would be a little. I have played Hall and Oates songs from the 70s and what have you for people who, and I didn't tell them who it was. And when you do tell them who it was, they're blown away.
Yeah.
They're shocked at who it is.
Yeah.
My one of my favorites of this is definitely Good Night and Good Morning.
Oh yeah.
It's yeah, and Cecilio and Capono, the Hawaiian duo, remade a beautiful version of this. And
Really?
yeah, and it's easy to find. And in fact, Daryl, when they do shows in Hawaii, Henry brings Henry Capono up on stage and does it with him.
Oh
And
wow.
yeah, and easy to find on YouTube. It's out there.
I will look
And
for that.
Yeah, and it was a song I used on one of my I Hold the Hearts. I used it on one of my granddaughter's birth videos, so it was really, it was kind of the theme and backing to it, and so I have always held that one to heart. But I got to say, probably my favorite song of Whole Oates is Lily Are You Happy?
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, it is. First of all, Daryl's voice in this song is this is where you really get your first honest to goodness taste of that guy's range. I mean,
Yes.
you really feel the heartfelt soul energy through his voice. You see where he's coming from. You know why they wanted this guy. You know what I mean when you hear that song. And not only that, it's a very sad song too, but to me, it will always be the one that sticks out of this album for me for sure. I mean, I think that it's an amazing tune. What's another one for you that you feel like
Well, I want to hop on board I was going to say I want to hop on board a Lily, but that does not sound
that
good.
was yeah yeah
But I want to
oh
agree with you about Lily, Are You
oh yeah
Happy? That
yeah
is such a
yeah
fantastic song. That's one that
yeah
I wrote about in that article and
really
highlighted because I agree with you. Daryl's vocals on that are amazing. And John's
yeah.
vocals, I think, are
Yes,
exceptional
he
on
is
that
are in
too.
there too. Yeah, they didn't
Yeah.
miss a trick in that song.
No, that
So,
one wraps up the album, and I think it was a perfect one to cap the album off with.
yeah, for
And
sure.
I, gosh, there's so many good songs on there. Another one that I like a lot is, and this is something I wanted to bring up when
Yeah.
talking specifically about the first few albums, is that back then, I mean, they've always been storytellers, but especially on the first few albums, and I think on several of the albums in the '70s, that you'd hear more and more stories in some of the songs. Like, and for example, there's
Yeah.
one on here called Georgie, which is quite
Yes.
unique.
Yeah.
Um, about you'd have to hear it, folks.
Yeah.
I encourage you to look it up. But it's a song that you think is just going to be a sweet song about two kids, but actually there's a tragedy that is sung about
Yes.
in there,
Yeah.
and it's it touches your heart, and not just through the lyrics, but also through Daryl Hall's vocals in that. That's a fantastic song. I love
It
that.
really is. And yeah, and you kind of wonder where their characters of the time came from. But you got to remember, these guys, bef- when fame does what it does, I mean, they became more reclusive as time went on. But back in the day, they were out and about in the public and venturing amongst the crowds in Philadelphia. They met a
Yeah.
lot of different people that probably found their way into these early songs that were really interesting characters, and I think that probably you know comes out very clearly, certainly in the first three albums. I'd say for sure the Atlantic years for sure. I see that more than anything really.
Yeah, I agree with you. Totally agree with you about the Atlantic albums. And any other songs on there you want to specifically call out as a favorite?
Water Wheel goes back to I think the back to that pirate album that I think they brought it. I think they brought that over from there. They were able to steal it back and use that. And that
Right.
was a wonderful piece. I mean, there's no real throwaways in this group. These are good songs. Arif just wasn't sure how to bring out the best of them in that, but they're raw songs. They're very they're not overproduced. Very raw emotion, very raw sounding. And you know what though, we wouldn't have when we look back on it, we probably wouldn't have wanted any other way. So
Right. And what's I wanted to touch briefly upon what you just said, the pirated album. There are multiple albums that have been
yes,
released over the decades. Sometimes they're even called like the best of Hall and Oates or Hall and Oates the early years, and it's from
yeah,
music that was really recorded before their first album came out.
right.
And I'm not really that familiar with it. I think I've heard a little bit of it that a friend had on an 8-track tape once, and I think
I
I was kind of trying to avoid it a little bit because I've seen interviews with both Daryl and John where they were like, "Oh, we wish that stuff wasn't even out there."
Yeah. Well, I owned one called Pastime Behind, and it
Oh, okay.
was, yeah, and I think I got it for $1.99 somewhere. And eh, but it was a lot of those songs. I think Lazy Man was on it. I mean, they've had a
Oh, okay.
few. they had a few that found their way into this. They were able to steal their songs, some of their songs back from that guy, and he just would repackage it and rename it and put a different thing on it when they needed a few dollars, I suppose. And that was how he, you know, that was how he did his best to make money off of his brief management of all the others, I guess. So.
Yeah, it was unfortunately a lot of well, some sleazy people in the music industry,
And you
that's
know
for
what?
sure.
You would hear that from a lot of well-known people
Oh yeah.
who have an album like that somewhere floating in the abyss that probably
Yeah.
they not happy about.
Yeah, especially back then, because you were still
Yeah,
within like the first 15, 20 years of rock and roll, really. So everything was
right.
new and people were trying to figure out, and lawyers had to start getting more involved and then back in the Elvis days and
Right.
stuff.
Well, let's face it, the performers just wanted to perform. The business end of it, they were lost. I mean, they had to, and as much as, they grew to, have their own indifferent feelings about Matola, he really and most of them are legit. I mean, he really did in many ways keep them from from some real rats, and I think that he probably did his best when it came to that part of the program because he wanted them for himself anyway. So he
Right.
really wasn't going to allow too much shenanigans anyhow.
And you said Matola. Is that Tommy Matola? Is that his
Tommy
name?
Mottola,
He
yeah,
was the head
yes,
of the label,
he
right?
was there. He was the head of their. Well, he was their manager.
Oh,
He's
okay.
their man.
That's right.
Tommy Mottola was their manager, and he was a young guy at the time. He was only about 21 years old, and I mean he's really young. I mean he's may have been even younger than the guys were, and yet he was very aggressive, kind of guy. Really wanted to make a name for himself in the record business, which he did, and he started. That was his pilot project was Hall and Oates for all the years that they were.
Wow.
But their relationship evolved differently through the years, as you're probably aware. And then
Not
things
to
changed over time. Yeah,
Yeah, not to go too far down a different rabbit hole,
yeah.
but
Let's let's let's.
did he end up? No, no. I was just going to say, did he end up marrying Mariah Carey?
Yes, he did.
Oh, okay. Oh, so he's had a horrible life, this guy, right?
It's just been miserable. He's only worth about $1 billion now. Okay, and it all started with all of us. Okay, so yeah, it's
and that album Whole Oats, it did come out in '72, and although it
72.
got some traction, especially like in the Philly area where they were getting a lot of regional radio play, it wasn't a big hit. It sold well enough that they kept going. And their next album though was a little bit more successful. That came out in
Mhm.
1973, again on Atlantic. And this is, I don't think I'd be too far out of line here, Dave, to say that this is probably a lot of fans' favorite album from the '70s, but
Yeah,
of Hall and Oates. It's a big,
some of their
big fan
favorite.
favorite.
Yeah, some of their favorite, some people's favorite album ever.
Yeah.
Certainly mine. Uh, and you either love this album or you're wrong. I mean, it's
I love that. Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
I
I'm
mean, it
not
really
wrong. I'm not
yeah.
wrong.
I mean, it's really Arif Martin again. I think has figured them out and surrounded them with a little bit of a better musician quality from there. I think but they brought really great songs
They did.
into this album. And here it is. It's like not even a year later. I mean, that was how it was back in the day. Everybody
Oh,
threw an
yeah.
album out every year, right?
Isn't
And it
it
was like
crazy
not
now
even
when you see how things are
yeah.
done
When you think
now? And
about it, right? But back then, you put a whole, you were done with one album. You did maybe a tour while you were on tour. You were working on the next album,
yeah.
which
And that
was,
was
and
most acts had an album out every year and was
yeah,
touring every
yeah,
year, and they were putting out quality stuff. And this
yeah.
one had so many good songs on it. There was only one song on it that ended up being a hit, but even that one wasn't a hit until a few years later.
Not
And that
right
song,
away.
yeah, that song is
Yeah,
"She's Gone." That
yeah,
was released as a single from the album, and
right.
it. What happened was, like I said, this album came out in '73, but then it was, I think it was after the success of Sara Smile in '76, the record label, they were on a different label at that point. They were on RCA when
Yeah.
Sara Smile came out. And
Which is
then,
where No Goodbyes comes in later, but
yeah, yeah, we'll
that's a
talk
big
about that
big
one
part. We'll
too.
we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get
Yeah,
to
we'll
that.
get to that, but yeah, and we'll get back to "She's Gone" too. We'll touch back on that
Yeah,
in the '70s too. But
yeah,
that's probably the most well-known song on the album.
sure.
But there's a lot of fan favorites on here. And do you have
Yeah,
any particular favorite song, Dave?
you could clearly do a whole episode on just this album, but In fact, there's one song on here you can actually do a whole episode around, and that's the title track, Abandoned Luncheonette.
Yes. Oh
I mean,
yeah.
the title track of this song has an incredible history that a lot of people really don't know about it. And with a little bit of internet research, I have found a lot of information about the luncheonette itself and things about the owner and stuff like that. I mean,
Oh wow.
just about his life and how it all evolved into how it, and where the guys come in, of course. And but it really is my favorite song. When I finally got to hear it live on the Change of Seasons tour for the first time, I think I broke down
Oh
in tears.
wow.
Yeah,
Oh, that's
which was
awesome. I didn't know you saw
oh,
them
which was
back
it.
then.
Yes, I saw them on the Change of Seasons tour, and there was a lot of interesting things on the Change of Seasons tour, including Las Vegas turnaround they did as well, but which is now a regular part of the set.
That's awesome.
Again,
That's a great
yeah,
song.
it's good, but I would be I can't find a bad song. I mean, there's nothing I really. I mean, I guess I'm just a kid. Don't make me feel like a man is a little creepy, but I mean, short of that. It's a little weird, but John does such a beautiful job on it. It's
He
hard to
he
open up.
does,
You
and
know,
that's the kind of thing too that I think may look a little bit more weird through the lens of time. Is that the right phrase? Because
yes,
even
yeah,
back then, these guys were fairly young. I can't remember how old. I think they were in their early or mid
early
twenties at the most.
20s, maybe, yeah,
Yeah,
20.
and you're still a kid
Well,
a lot in a lot of ways
right,
yourself back then.
yeah, and you don't know when any of the songs were written. I mean, just some of them
Yeah,
may have been written a little sooner, than whatnot. I mean, She's Gone was probably written even while Old Oats was being made or what have you when they were living on
yeah.
Quinn Street. If you've ever visited their home on Quinn Street, it
Oh
was
no,
it's
I haven't.
I've been there. It's really interesting
Is
to
that
how they.
Philly or is that New York
It's in
or?
Philly. It's in
Oh,
Philly.
oh,
Yeah,
okay.
South Quinn Street. Can't drive down the street. You have to walk by foot. And
Oh,
yeah, and it's painted. The brick is painted on the one that's their place. Okay,
oh wow. Oh, cool.
it's very interesting. And
We'll
no
have to
sign
meet
of
up
them
there
or anything
sometime and
like
get a
that. Yeah,
cheesesteak.
sometime we'll go check it out and get a cheesesteak. Pat's or Geno's, you pick. And then yeah, I mean on here, one of the things I gotta say is, Laughing Boy is an incredible song. I think
Yeah.
it's one of those songs that would speak to the times today. It's one of those, where with mental health issues and whatnot, where
Yeah.
it was, I mean,
I think you're
the
right.
song's ahead of its time, I think, in many ways. And if anybody listened to it, they could really see that plays deeply into there. Um, you know, uh, when the morning comes is a classic. I mean, it just is. You could play that over and over again and not get sick of
Yeah.
it. And it's just all so good on this one,
It's all
really.
so good. I mean, one of my
Yeah,
favorite. I mean, there's nothing on here that I don't like, and it's funny. This is an album where, let me see. I guess I got this probably in the late '90s, mid to late '90s, like when I really got into buying uh, CD copies of things that were. Well, when this originally came out, I was a little kid.
yeah,
I think I
yeah.
was
Me too. I was 10.
eight or
Yeah, I
nine
was
years
10.
old. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and I went through a phase where I was getting every Hall and Oates album on CD that I could find. The only one I can't find is the next release, which we'll be talking about shortly. But yeah, when I got this, I was probably around 30, and I instantly fell in love with it. But there were some songs that maybe I didn't love at first, but like well, you mentioned Laughing Boy and the final song, Every Time I Look at You, they took a while to grow on me. And I
Yeah.
think too, part of that might be the fact that you already had like 7, 8 songs before those that were just so good. I would listen to them,
Yeah.
and whether I was driving somewhere and then the album would be over, I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of forgot about those last
I
two
love his
songs.
life too. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Uh,
every time I look at you is a lengthier one too. That's like
It
just
is. It's
over
like
seven
6 or
minutes
7
long.
minutes. Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah,
It's not a short song, and you know what? It really, even though Daryl does the vocals on it, you can really hear John's musical influence, the bluegrass, rootsy kind of blues feel to the sound of it. It's not Motown by any means,
no,
and
no,
it's very it's very almost country like, and that's one of the things I always remember about it the most. And then, they took some liberties with it. It was pretty, it's like you said, it was a song that did grow on me too over the years. It was initially not my favorite But over
Yeah,
time.
I just read a thing today. I was while researching for the show, I learned a lot of things about the act and their early albums that I didn't know. And
Mm,
apparently, Daryl Hall, he had said in an interview, I think just sometime in the past 10, 15 years, that he thought that the first side of this album, which was the first five songs, like "When the Morning Comes," "Had I Known You Better Then," "Yes, I'm Reading Them All," the Las Vegas Turnaround, "She's
mm,
Gone," and I'm just a kid, don't feel like a man. He thought that was like a perfect side. That he was really really happy with that, how it came out.
yeah.
The second
Yep.
side, which contains some of the songs we just mentioned, he said there are some things he wished were a little different with that, and he attributed some of that to the guitarist that they had at the time, who ended up producing a couple of albums of them too, or co-producing, Chris Bond,
Yeah.
where
Chris
I think,
Bond. Yeah. We'll get to
yeah,
him.
yeah, I don't know a lot about him. You're probably going to
I
educate
do.
me, but
I know a little bit about Chris. Just a
oh,
little, but
okay.
I know enough.
But what Daryl said was apparently when they did this album at that point in the early '70s, Daryl wasn't yet a big fan of the Beatles music. I mean, he liked the popular stuff, but I think it wasn't until later he got into that and really got to appreciate it. And I think
More soul
Bond,
driven, really. Yeah,
yeah,
he was more soul driven.
yeah, and yeah, and I think Bond. He said Daryl said if he could change anything, it was maybe some of the like more experimental Beatley things that Bond did. And I wonder if that might have even been like "Every Time I Look at You" might have been one of those songs because there's some like
It's
yeah,
very
it's a
possible. Yeah,
yeah,
it's very possible. I mean, but Ar- Arif did an amazing job on this. I mean, it is clean as could be. I mean, as far as this album goes, I mean, it's the production on it is spot on. The
yeah, it
arrangements
is.
are just amazing. I mean, any things aside about it are totally something that like how like you see something with flaws and it's part of its charm. I mean, I think that this is probably if there are any on there, it would be the case for me. I mean, that's the way I
Yeah.
would feel.
Yeah,
So
it's I still listen to it regularly, and I actually just I'm in the process of writing a separate article about that album too that I'm going to publish
yeah,
for on Medium
I
soon.
have I have owned eight different versions of this. Okay, I mean
Really?
between losses and through the
Yeah,
years and whatnot,
yeah.
and when the album it took 40 something years for this album to go gold, and
Wow.
which was surprising. And when it finally
Yeah.
went gold, John was very very proud of it, and he posted his gold record and what have you. And I posted right underneath it. I says, well, I says, you owe a lot of it to me. I says, because I'm in charge of eight versions of this, right?
Oh,
And
that's
he personally
fantastic.
and he personally thanked me for
Oh,
that.
that's so cool. That's really cool.
It was
That's
very
really
nice. It
cool.
was very nice. I was very proud of that moment. But
Wow.
yeah, so
It's funny
so
when you
yeah,
hear. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no,
It is
okay.
funny though when you hear that about an older album that you know so well and you feel such a tight bond with to think, oh, that wasn't gold. Oh, that wasn't a hit when it was out. But that album did at the time. It didn't even break the top 100 when it came out. And
No.
the first one that did break the top 100 was their next album, which was War
Yeah,
Babies.
which is
Just
bizarre, but I think
barely.
that yeah,
Yeah.
which I mean the crazy part about War Babies is almost Atlantic's next record, but what I find amusing about War Babies, just to even preamble this, is that here you are coming off a relatively successful album,
Hmm.
okay, and things are going well, the production is good, you got good. Let's go make an expensive, experimental, mescaline-driven album, okay?
Right.
That was like, I mean, it was just how and where a lot of this came from. But the crazy part about it is they fronted, and Todd Rundgren's the producer, and they fronted Todd an exorbitant amount of money to be the producer, and he used Utopia as part of the backing band of it, which I don't know that you knew that, but
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
yeah, yeah.
And they were just recently formed at that point, I
They were just
think.
recently formed. They had just started doing their own stuff and everything. And Daryl, asked Todd to get involved. And Todd said, "Well, I got a new band. Would you like to use them?" And but they fronted them out of their Atlantic royalty, $65,000.
Really?
And
I
and
wow.
think about $65,000 back in 1973 and four. Okay, I mean, that's five houses, three cars, and food for 2 years. Okay, I
Yeah,
mean,
seriously.
that's
Yeah.
that's a lot of money, and
Right.
he loaded up Todd big time for this album, and Todd's hand is all over this. I mean, it
Yeah.
really is a big part of it. It's in fact, I have an entire friendship with a guy over this one album. Okay, which is
Oh
very
wow.
strange, but yeah, but the reality of this album is there's not a bad song on it, really.
No.
I mean they're good. There's no money. There's no money songs. Okay, there's no
No.
real good money songs or anything like
No,
that,
there's
which is
not.
sure disturbing the heck out of Atlantic back then. But but when you look at this album, okay, there's the songs are so good, and you don't really you can't really turn your back on this album because it's weird.
No.
I mean,
Yeah.
and
What's interesting, I had mentioned before that this was one that eluded me. For the longest time, it wasn't available on CD. It was out of print
found it
for.
at a tag sale.
Did you?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I couldn't.
yeah,
I know when we first met in the early 2000s, I could talk, very fluently with you about all their albums except for that one.
yeah.
I might have been able to find one or two of them on, I don't even know if YouTube was around back then. I guess they were,
No,
but
it
there
wasn't.
wasn't much you could find until it
No,
became available on Spotify and such. That
no.
I think was just in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really just honestly, it's just in the past year or so that I've really started listening to it on a regular basis. I'm
Mhm.
still, I don't know these songs totally inside and out, but I agree with you. There's not a bad song on it. There was one single release, and that was the opening track, "Can't Stop the Music." He played it much too long, but it didn't do very well. The
No, it
album
didn't.
somehow made it up to number 83. I think maybe that might have been because Todd Rundgren was a big superstar then, and I think people were curious about it, and plus people were starting to know Daryl and John from the first two
A little
albums.
bit.
And
A little bit.
but what
Yeah.
are some of your favorites on there? I know you love
My
them
favorite.
all.
I do like them all. I mean, I guess if I didn't like one, it would be number seven on the tracks I'm watching, or Mutant Romance. But my
Yeah.
favorite by far is Screaming Through December. I
Oh
mean, it
yeah, that's a
will
great
always
song.
be my favorite. And I don't know that you know this, but Chris Bond is Faustus. Okay, in the song.
Oh,
Yes.
oh, okay. I did
Okay.
not know that.
So yeah, Chris Bond is definitely the fine line between manic and calm. Okay. He is
Oh, okay. Yeah,
he's
I know very, very little about, their
yeah.
interactions
Um
with their. Go ahead.
yeah, but I Can't Stop the Music is a groovy little tune. I mean,
Yeah, it
I
is.
I love John's voice on it. It's just so, it comes out. It was a good perfect lead song for this album.
Yeah,
I
it
mean, he
was.
really,
Yeah.
they're
I,
all bizarre. I mean, in their own
I
way.
like, yeah, they are. And I think if people, and I think that might have been something that when I would see, before I even owned a copy of the album, I would look at the song titles because I could see them online. And I'm like, Beanie G and the Rose Tattoo. That's an interesting title.
Who
And
would have
then,
thought, right?
yeah, Johnny Gore and the
Johnny
Sea
Gore
Eaters. I mean,
and you
and War
learn
Baby, Son of Zorro.
Son
I
of
mean, there's some
Sorrow, yeah.
really interesting.
And you learn that Johnny Gore and the Sea Eaters is an actual band that they drove by a marquee.
That's
Okay,
right.
yes, and it was supposed to be Johnny Gore and the Cheaters, but the H had fallen off the
Oh
thing,
my gosh.
the
Okay, I didn't know
marquee.
that.
Yes, and the
Wow.
magnet of the H had come down. So they're driving by and they're like, "What the heck is a Sea Eater?" Okay, so
That's
so
fantastic. I love that.
so they were a little confused by that, and they had already written a song by the time they left that town about this imaginary band called Johnny Gore and the Sea Eaters. Okay, and then on the way out of town, okay, they saw that the H was on the other side of the marquee, properly placed. Okay, and they were like, if that H was there would be no song because we never would have even thought twice about it. So,
I want to do a deep
but
dive now and try to find out about the actual band, Johnny Gore and
Johnny Gore and the Cheaters. We
Cheaters.
gotta find their work somewhere. It's got to be somewhere lingering out there. But "Screaming Through December" apparently a semi-real song that took place with all of them during the month of December, which is what they say they never did hard drugs, but okay, I'll take their word for it.
I
But
like You're
whatever
Much
happened
Too Soon
happened.
a lot. That's a good song.
Much Too Soon is a really good song.
It is. I think
Um,
that would have been a good single release.
It would have been a good single. Better Watch Your Back a single? It may have
I'm
been.
not sure.
It may have been a minor single. I thought it might have
Yeah.
been. I wasn't sure. And Is It a Star is a really good song. I
It
mean,
is.
it's mellow. I mean, probably they probably clam baked the room and made that one, but
Hmm.
I don't know. It was a really good song, and Johnny Gore and the Sea Eaters is a good way to end this mess. I mean,
Yeah.
it
Yeah, it
really is
was.
just a classic ending to this whole thing. 70s Scenario is a very introspective song. I mean, I think it's, they just clearly, it's a well written and very clear definition of a lot of things that were going on to the times to them. And I think that they verbalized it pretty well. And Todd's production on that is really quite good too, I think. I mean, you can really, you know, he really played Daryl's voice super well on that,
Yeah,
and I
he
like
did. And it's nice to know that there's still like a relationship too. I know particularly between Daryl and Todd Rundgren, because I think
they
they
open for
toured
each
together
other and
now.
stuff. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
Todd played Daryl's house last year and what
yeah,
have you. Where he played the actual Daryl's house too, for a couple of nights. And
yeah.
yeah,
That's
and
pretty awesome.
yeah, it really is. And it was a good relationship, even if it was a little strange. I don't really think they ever got out of Todd what they truly hoped to at first. I think it
Yeah,
was like, they thought he was, because he was a Philly guy, they thought he kind of had a Philly vibe about him, and he probably in some ways did. But I mean, Todd's music is significantly different from what they were trying to
yeah,
provide. Yeah.
yeah. And
And
I was going to say that you had touched on this a little while ago in that they had the fairly successful album with Abandoned Luncheonette, and this came out and it was so different from that, and very
got him fired.
experimental.
Got
And
them fired.
I think they had a lot of they had a lot of situations like that throughout the 70s where it seemed like there were times that they would take a couple steps forward, then three steps back. It's like, and that's because and again, you said this at the very beginning of the show, they were still trying to find their sound in a lot of ways, and there was a lot of different factors involved with the band members and production and such.
This wasn't it. This wasn't their sound, but
No.
it was a very strange time to do an experimental album. But on the other hand, though, I mean, looking back on it, it was a necessity for them. I mean, it was
Yeah.
certainly a thing that we look back on, and I can honestly say, you know, was a good album, and it was good songs, and like I said, it got them fired from Atlantic. They were just they cut them off right then and there. It was like, because there was one, what it is, record companies don't want to make money.
Yeah.
They don't want to be your experiment,
And like you said, they spent a lot of money for that time on this album, and
and
it didn't do well. And
didn't
like
do
you said,
well, and
yeah.
you know, so they
And
moved
but
on.
like,
They moved on from each other at that point.
yeah, and before we move on to the next album, I'll just say,
Yeah,
I think, whether it's a musical act or a writer or any kind of artist, you have to try different things to find out, who you
sure.
are artistically. So I think they had to take those, I don't like to use the word missteps, but sort of like, experimental tries at things.
The unfortunate thing is the way the record companies looked at it is you're doing this on our dime, and that's
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
the way they felt about it. I mean, we're kind of grown ups now, okay, and we see that, okay, but when we were 22, how would we have felt? I mean, we would have
Yeah.
thought that this was a perfectly reasonable thing to do,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
so
Exactly.
and I mean, so even in the foolishness of it all, it meant something to them,
Yeah.
and we would have probably done the same thing,
Yeah. We're talking about this album 49 years later. So, I mean, it's,
Right.
and we're talking very favorably about it. So they did not,
It
mess up
dated
there.
well. It
Yeah.
dated well. Yeah,
Yeah,
it really did.
and they kept moving forward after that. Their
They
record
did.
label dropped them, but then things started turning in a really good direction with them. And this album may be it's popular particularly for one song, but I think it might be popular in a lot of ways for the album cover itself. The album is called Daryl Hall and John Oates, and a lot of fans call it the Silver Album because it's silver on the cover. But
Mhm.
Daryl Hall and John Oates, they are on the front of it, but they are so glammed up on there. It's sort of like a look that you would see like Bowie and others have back in that time period. And a lot of people, have made jokes about that over the years, including Daryl and John themselves. I think it was I've seen a couple of interviews with John where he has said that, people might have made fun of it, but it is probably our most talked about album cover. So in a lot of
True.
ways, it succeeded because of what
It's
we did on
true.
the cover.
Right. right.
And that
And
one had their first really big hit song on it, and that was Sara Smile. That was their first blockbuster hit.
happened by accident. I mean,
Oh, is that
it was
right?
one of, yeah, it happened by accident. It was not, I don't know if it was going to be released as a single, but somebody, all good things happen in Cleveland apparently when it comes to these things. Um, Somebody played it as an album cut, and before you know it, it was just everybody was
Oh,
all over it, and it was one of those songs that just blew up. The original hit of this song is one of my favorites, Camellia, which
yeah.
was supposed to be the big hit off this song, and
Yeah, that was the first single released,
really,
right?
yeah, it's a really good John song,
It is. It
and
is.
and in
Great opening
fact,
track.
it really is. And you know what? I John on Change of Seasons, there was a part of the show where the guys, either went to the bathroom or whatever they were doing, left John out there to strum guitar and play by himself, which he was fine with, and he breaks out Camellia,
Oh,
and
wow.
I mean, again, it was one of those moments that was like, are you kidding? All these shows
That's
I've been to,
so
I've
cool.
never heard this, right? But it was wonderful, and he was doing so good at that. Apparently, it's one of those John songs that apparently Daryl loves. Okay,
Oh, cool.
and Daryl just with a drink in his hand flew back on stage, grabbed the microphone, and began to just sing it with him. He goes, "I could not
Oh,
miss doing
nice.
Camellia one last time." He was like, he
Oh,
says
wow.
he loves that song apparently.
Oh, that's
And
so
so
cool.
that's, yeah, and this was one of their true, real good harmonies on the album.
Hmm.
That they, you really get the feel of what that harmonious kind of sound of theirs will be growing into in the future. As their voices matured and what have you. You get a real feel for it in Camellia, and
Yeah,
that's one of the beautiful things about it. Chris Bond takes over as producer for the first time,
right.
and which it's like I guess for all the clowns are running the circus sort of thing with Chris Bond. Apparently, he was a wizard. I mean,
Wow.
he was a musical genius in many ways. And I think he's still with us. And
I believe he is. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and he apparently they were very fond of his work in the beginning. I mean, they were very happy with what he was doing. Um, and a lot of other people, he's highly respected, for his craft. And but he begins to assemble a little bit of a Steely Dan kind of thing with them, where he begins to bring in musicians from all over the place because they're out in California,
Hmm.
okay, and they're not in their element, and they're not really used to what's going on at the time. And Chris assembles, a revolving door kind of group of musicians that the guys aren't used to and they hadn't played with, and it just, he brings in who he knows, and he begins to put out their work that way, and I think the guys were real pleased with that part of it, where they
Okay.
felt like, where they feel like that's where it began to drift a little bit on them from what they were trying to accomplish.
Let me ask you something, Dave. Now, I'm only a little bit familiar with like who played what on the early albums. I know he played guitar. Was he the lead guitarist with them, like for a while, or I guess he was just a
I,
regular
I
guitarist?
I don't think he was lead. No,
Oh, okay. Just,
I
but
don't think he
yeah, he
was lead.
played with them and then ended up producing most of the.
Yeah, and he
Yeah.
ended up producing most of them. What are your favorites on this one?
This is, it's funny. This is an album that I have not listened to a whole lot for whatever reason. I've got my favorites on it.
Me neither, to be
Camellia,
honest with you.
Camellia is a great song. I like that
Yeah.
a lot. And yeah, I don't know. Oh, you know what? I found out something interesting here, and I've always liked this song, "Grounds for Separation,"
Hmm.
which is towards the end of the album. I just found out today that had been considered to be featured in the first Rocky movie.
Really?
It turned out that, and assuming this information I read is correct, if not, I apologize, world. But apparently,
Yeah.
John Oates had previously, before Hall and Oates, been connected with Frank Stallone, Sylvester Stallone's brother. They had done some music together. and Frank was working on the music for the first Rocky movie. He appears in there with his band at the time, Valentine, who I think Oates might have done some work with, and they sing a song like around a trash can outside. I don't know if you remember in Rocky. There's a song called "Take It
Yes.
Back." Yeah,
Yep. The old
but
acapella thing. Yeah, sure.
yeah, yeah, and apparently
Yeah.
though, Grounds for Separation was going to be in the movie, but then the movie got delayed. The production kept getting delayed, so Hall and Oates pulled it from being featured in there. But that would have been kind of neat if
No
they had a song in
kidding.
the
That
first
would have
Rocky
been neat.
movie.
Yeah. And you know what? It may have, who knows what it would have all done to the course of their history at that point.
Yeah,
It may have done, changed things a little bit, may have speeded things along or wrecked them for all we know, but who knows?
yeah.
Um,
I like "Alone Too Long"
it's
too. That's a good song.
Gone Too Long is a great song.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
You know
another
what's
story
actually,
is Gino the manager.
and that's Tommy.
Yeah, that's Tommy. That's based on
And
Tommy
that's
Mottola.
Tommy. That's based on Tommy. Yes, that's
Hmm.
that. This is about him. This is their little pseudo bio for their Tommy, and hard work means because I guess these were all little things he used to throw at them. Live
Oh,
fast, die
okay.
laughing. Hard work means something. He used to say that, and they turned it into a song, and they did it. And again, outside of the Hall and Oates world, that song doesn't translate well. But to
Yeah,
us, it has some serious value. Soldering. Soldering is a great little catchy Jamaican song.
it
And
is. Yeah, and that
yeah,
was not one that they
not
wrote
theirs,
themselves.
right? Not theirs,
You,
right?
you can go
Yep.
ahead. I think you know probably more
No,
about this
no,
than I
no,
do.
no. You
Oh,
you
okay.
you hit it up just yeah, you hit it right on the head. It wasn't their song, but it was a good little,
Yeah,
catchy thing to end the album, which is great.
and they
Um,
seem to have a tendency to do that back then, in particular, where they ended their albums with maybe songs that were a little bit different than the
yeah,
rest, and that one definitely fell into that category. But it was a fun,
without
it
yeah,
was a cool
without
song
a
to end it
doubt.
with.
Yeah. Is there anything on here you don't like? I mean, you know,
Oh, you know what? Now this is something I never know how to pronounce this. How do you
One Way on the
say?
Mountain.
How do you say the first word?
I've
And
always thought of it as On Way. I
yeah, I
used to
think you
think it
might be
was
right.
NUI.
Yeah.
Okay,
What's
but I
it?
looked
What I
it
was
up
gonna
one
say.
time.
That's a good song, but what's funny is, do
Yeah.
you play Wordle, the game Wordle?
I have not, but my wife does.
Oh, okay. Well, I play it. My wife and I play it every morning,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and you have to guess a word. You guess letters to form a word. And one morning about a month ago, that was the word. It
Oh,
was the Wordle
really?
word. And my wife is like, I've never heard that word before. And I'm like, honey, the
You
only
have?
reason that I know it is because it's on the Daryl Hall and John Oates album from 1975. Like,
Right.
it's not one you hear every day.
No. And again, it's funny you bring up 1975. We're talking 10 months after War Baby. So all of this
Yeah.
they get cut from Atlantic, okay? They move on to RCA. This is their
Mm-hmm.
first RCA. They move on to
Yeah.
RCA, and within a matter of a few months, there's another album ready to go,
Yeah.
which is amazing. But yes, on way on the mop. That's what I
I
looked
think you're
up the
right.
actual way to say that word, but
I think
whatever.
I'm with you. That's how I'm gonna
Right.
say it, on way on the mountain.
Right.
Oh,
And
another
and
thing I learned. Go ahead, Dave.
well, go ahead. What are you saying?
No, I was gonna say another thing I learned here. I had mentioned "Alone Too Long." I didn't realize this, but apparently it was used as a theme song on a HBO comedy series in the past decade. It was this show called "Hello Ladies." It came out in 2013, and it starred actor named Stephen Merchant. And
Okay.
I've heard of it, and I think my wife had actually seen it years ago and raved about it. But apparently, that was the theme song for that. So hey, more money in H&O's pocket. So yay to
Sure. Yeah.
that.
Any few cents that goes their way, I'm sure they're pleased
Yeah.
with. But that's great. It doesn't matter anymore is an interesting tune too because Sarah actually this is one of the first songs I guess she ever contributes anything to,
That's Sarah Allen,
and
for those who don't know.
yeah, Sarah Allen Daryl's yeah, yeah, and she's also um what would be a good word for a muse of Las Vegas
Yeah.
turnaround.
Yeah, that's
Um,
right.
yeah, but she is actually they're I guess downstairs at the house or what have you, and they're trying to write a song and they can't. they can't get to the end of it or figure out what to say. And apparently she opens up the cellar door and she screams down. She goes, it doesn't matter anymore, right?
Really? Oh, that's awesome.
and
And that
and
just
and the guys are like, light bulb, okay, now that becomes the chorus of the song. And it was like they just went with it. And
oh, that's
she said
awesome.
she was getting so frustrated with listening to them play that same tune over and over again all day long. And she said that it was sounding worse each time. And she was just she
She ended up
pipes
writing a
in and
lot of
says that she
songs with
ended
them,
up
I'm
writing
sure.
us songs. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And yeah,
um
so that's a great album. And again,
it is,
I'm
it's
glad that
good.
it's something that I rediscovered recently because when I initially bought that back in the late '90s, it was probably at a period where I bought maybe three or four other H&O albums at the same time, and for whatever
Mhm.
reason, that kind of got pushed aside, and I was focusing on the other ones. Kind of almost forgot it was there to a degree.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's got a it really it's another one. There's really not bad songs on it. It's a solid album.
solid album. I mean, it was a good start with RCA. They were pleased to get a big hit out of it.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing was Atlantic was pleased for that they got a big hit out of it, because then Atlantic
Yeah.
had now some way to start making some of their money back from the losses of the previous work.
Exactly. Like we said, that album
Because
was a hit.
yeah,
Sara Smile was a hit. So
yeah.
Atlantic decides to. Was it then that they released the compilation, or they
Does
might
it
have just
go
released
next?
Sarah's? I mean, sorry, She's Gone as a single then.
They released She's Gone as a single, but it doesn't wind up on the compilation album
Right. You
yet.
know,
But they
goodbye.
do. Well, part of the reason why that things have gone so well is also Tavares had a hit with She's Gone.
Yes,
And
that's right.
so the song was already out there. And Tavares had made everybody aware of the song, and it became a popular, mid 70s, underground classic of theirs.
Right.
And if you listen to it, it's really quite good.
It is.
And yeah, and so releasing it again was kind of, and now that they had a hit of their own, releasing the song again was a no-brainer. I mean,
Yeah.
it was really a good opportunity for them. But that's not what happens next. What happens next is they actually, what, less than or just about a year later, make another album.
Yeah, and that
Oh,
was Bigger Than Both of Us.
and
That came
both of
out.
us.
It was produced by Christopher Bond again. That came out in
Yeah,
'76.
yeah,
That is one of my favorites of them. It's from the '70s in particular. That's one of my favorite
yeah.
albums. It's got a lot of good songs on it.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, and it's a very intentional album. It's like it's one of those albums where I think they made songs that they wanted to be a little more radio friendly. They wanted to
Hmm.
be, and you and me, we're raised on radio. That's a real
Yeah,
thing, and they made radio friendly songs at the time. There were songs you could actually, try to put out and be commercial with it, and that's okay. Commercials got its place.
yeah,
And yeah, these are some pretty good songs on here. I mean, obviously there's the hit "Rich Girl," which
yeah.
a lot of people don't know is about a guy.
Oh, I didn't know
And
that. It's about a guy,
no
really?
way.
No, I didn't know that.
Oh, okay. Well, Rich Girl is about a guy.
Oh,
It's
wow.
about a trust fund guy, okay, who is a friend of Sarah's, okay, and
Ah,
I don't know if Sarah was a little jealous of him or whatever. I guess she talked about him, but the guy was kind of always blowing through the end of his blowing through the end of his allowance, and so he was always going back to dad. And so he wrote a song about it. And then when they
wow.
brought it in the studio, they were like, this isn't going to sell well as a guy. Okay, you gotta turn this into an it girl somehow.
Right.
And so he said, all right. So they flipped it around and made it a girl. And before
I
you
had
know it,
no
it was
idea.
yes, that's a true story.
That is so
Um,
cool. And that is probably, I can't, confirm this for sure because I was 10 years old when the album came out. I'm pretty sure that was probably the first Daryl Hall and John Oates song that I knew because I was 10 years old then. And that's when I was really getting into listening to top 40 radio. And that was a big hit. And for me, and kids that I grew up with, I remember us all just thinking it was so cool because they said a curse word in there. They said a naughty word in there because it was,
Yes,
these,
right.
you hear bitch girl in there. Sorry, listeners, but you hear that,
Well,
and if
YouTube.
but it's like, oh, did they just say that? Wow,
Yeah, I mean,
it's
when I was a
naughty. It's
kid,
great.
yeah,
I love it. Yeah.
I remember we went to movies back then, and if we heard, you went to a movie where there was one or two swear words in it, that was it. You were the coolest kid on the block that week.
Yeah.
I mean, I sat through 3.5 bloody hours of Gone with the Wind just to hear the word "damn" at the end of it. Okay.
And what's funny is roughly around the same time that this album came out, I remember having the same kind of feelings about the Bad News Bears movies because I was hearing
Yeah, there you
kids,
go. And
curse just a little
it's
bit in there.
cursing. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
But so
And
yeah, that was a monster hit for him from this album. It wasn't the only single, but it was the most
no,
successful.
but you know
Back
the funny
Together
thing
Again was
about
also a single. I'm sorry, go ahead.
True, but you know the amazing thing about Rich Girl is it's not a long song. I mean,
No,
I don't even think it's I don't see the time on it, but I don't even think it's a 3 minute song. I mean,
it's not. I got it here. It's 2:24. It's a really short
okay.
song.
It's a
Yeah.
short song, and I mean they really go right through it. And I mean
Yeah.
but you know what? Radio loved that. I mean
Oh,
that was the
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, radio loved that. The shorter your song was, the better, because they wanted to cram in as many songs into an hour as they could possibly do on a typical day. And so if you were making a song, if everybody made 224 songs, they'd be in heaven. I mean, that was the way it went. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that was a big reason why this was a hit on radio and got a lot of play.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's such a great song. That song really holds up. My wife
Yes.
and I listen a lot to. We have Sirius XM, so we listen to.
Hmm.
Well, it wouldn't be her first choice, but I would play the '70s station on there a lot, and like the different things like that, the oldies, and we hear that probably at least once every couple of weeks. And she's a little younger than me. She was born in the early
Yeah,
'80s, but she loves
yeah,
that
yeah,
song. She loves hearing this
yeah.
this stuff. It
Most
really holds
kids
up.
do.
Yeah,
Most younger people do love that song. That's a
yeah,
popular song amongst younger people. I mean, when they hear that as a Hall and Oates old classic of some sort, that catches with them. It
yeah.
doesn't miss them, believe me. And
Absolutely, good music can last forever, and there's so much good music on this one.
this
We said,
one,
of course, that was a hit. Another one that there were multiple singles released from this. Back
hmm
Together
hmm
Again was the
back
opening
together again.
track. That's a good John Oates song, I think.
John
It's one
Oates
of my
song.
favorites
Yep,
John does.
yep, yep.
Yeah, and
Do what you want, be what you are is a good melding of their vocals through it. I think
yes,
it's fantastic. Um, later that they started to really play off their harmonies and whatnot, which was really quite good. My favorite on here, though, by far, is still "Room to Breathe."
yeah,
Um, and it's a rocking kind of song. It's not really a pop or a soul song. It's actually kind of them rocking out a little bit,
yeah,
and I think this is where we meet Charlie, where he comes.
yes.
Yeah, where he
Pretty
comes
sure this
in.
is the album that he joined him on.
Yeah, yeah,
Charlie
and
DeChant, for those who don't
yeah,
know.
plays saxophone and is still with Daryl and John to
Yeah, I
this
think I
day.
just read he's 78 now. I think, but he's still
78,
out
he's
there
still
working and
still out
gigging.
there.
He's a fantastic performer.
Doesn't run through the audience as much as he used to, but he's still out there, blowing the horn. I mean, he's
Yeah.
amazing. And yeah, and that's where he's the longest serving member of the band, which
Yeah.
and he was actually the first one of the classic lineup
Yeah, he
that
was.
came in the 80s, and yet he's still, with them today, which is
I,
incredible.
that is incredible. And yeah, it's a good solid album and
What
it
did
was
you think of
after
Crazy Eyes?
now actually I was gonna comment on that. That's one of my favorites on it. Do you
Yeah,
not
yeah.
do you not like that one or do you like that
I
one?
like I like Crazy Eyes with a good John,
I think that would have been a good choice for a single. I think that might have
I
even
did
done better
too.
than some of the other ones.
I do
I
too.
still I get that that's a song that I can't play it without it being stuck in my head for hours afterward, and I'm okay with that. It's such a
Yeah,
good
yeah.
song. The harmonies in that are great. The music is
Yep.
nice. It's a good song.
sometimes sometimes I think just a lot of what went wrong was the choice of singles. Sometimes was not the
Yeah.
greatest, and I mean I think a lot of that too started becoming, especially maybe right about here, where Tommy was starting to favor Daryl maybe just a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and you could start to see. the relationship of everybody, because every time they tried to put out a John song, it may have been a really good song, but maybe it didn't have that commerciality to it all the time.
Right.
That it didn't have the success that even though it was very always a pretty radio friendly song and what have you, it didn't always have that lasting commercial success that that some of the Daryl songs may have had. And so I kind of think that this is where the favoritism with Tommy to Daryl began to maybe take hold just a
Yeah, I
little
can see
bit.
that. I can see that, and that's such a common thing too with bands, you know. And one thing, they're a much different kind of act, but I think of the Bangles. You know, the Bangles, each one of them sang songs and wrote songs on the albums, and the hits all came with Susanna Hoffs on lead vocals, and you saw that favoring with what the record company released and the management
Yeah,
released, and it ended up causing
and
that group to break up for a long time.
what the videos looked like and everything. They were
Yeah,
all very Susanna. They were all very Susanna highlighted. I mean, they were,
yeah,
they were all. Everything was about her. They put her front and center to everything, and it was a very talented band all the way through.
yeah.
And it really
Favoritism
was.
happens in all kinds of
Favoritism
acts, I
happened.
get.
It does. It does.
Yeah. You
The
could even say
Susanna.
the same thing about Simon and Garfunkel. You saw Paul Simon might have written all the songs, but the Artie Garfunkel led songs, weren't.
Right. They may not
Yeah,
always have done as well, but where would the art, art is in this absolute necessity. And I
yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
and
I call him Artie
the
like he's my pal. Yeah, the Artie
art,
Garfunkel
you got
song.
you got to give it the New York vibe, Artie, like he always said, Artie.
Yeah. But yeah, I like that album a lot, and that was another
Yeah,
one
it's a
too.
good
It
one.
was a big hit for him, and it was after that compilation album I think came out that you
No
talked
Goodbyes
about.
comes out now. Atlantic puts out No Goodbyes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Trying to, they put together, songs from the first three albums, and I guess there were a couple songs that didn't make it on there that well, it's Uncanny was one of them, which actually is a hit song. I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah. That
you
that that became a hit. There was two other songs I know that I guess had not been released, and they came out on other compilations later.
yeah.
Can't stop. I'm sorry. Love You Like a Brother was one, and another one called I Want to Know You for a Long Time. And the others were, the hits like She's Gone, but then you had stuff like Lily, Are You Happy, which we talked about,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
70 Scenario. And it's a good compilation. I think, I don't know how well it actually ended up doing for Atlantic, but it made them some more money. The songs had
Made
just
them
been
a few more
sitting there.
dollars. Helped them
Yeah.
push She's Gone a little bit more through, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm sure in the business end of Hall and Oates, which we've talked about before. Um, I think it went a long way to solidify that they didn't leave any bad feelings, and maybe that's
Yeah.
no goodbyes to how that reflects. So
Yeah.
who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think though I don't know this for sure. I just have kind of wondered about this. We talked about how they took some steps forward, and then it seemed like they almost immediately took some steps back, whether it was through what they did or just the way it worked out with what the record buying people were or were not doing. But the next album was not as popular. That was Beauty on a
No,
Back Street. And what I was
no.
going to say is I wonder if that may have been at least in small part because No Goodbyes had just been released, and maybe people were thinking, "Oh, well, we already had a Hall and Oates album here, and we already knew a new song."
You
And
never,
you
yeah,
never
I mean, you
know.
don't know what people were thinking in
Yeah,
76, 77. It's hard to say, but,
I was thinking I just wanted
but
to, go outside and ride my skateboard.
yeah, exactly. That was, yeah, although me and my little brother were probably thinking somewhere along these lines, but who knows? But, nonetheless, I mean, this isn't really a good album. I mean,
It's probably my least favorite.
yeah, and it's their least favorite.
Oh, is that
They're
right?
not.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's their least favorite. They have absolutely very little use for this, but there are good songs on here. The Emptiness is a good song. Um, Funny that the song "Bigger Than Both of Us" is on this album,
I
but
know.
damn, an out previous that never made any sense to me. I'm sure that confused a
No.
few people along the way. These are just, I mean, "Don't Change" is a good song. Could
Yeah.
could have been a hit in another album. I guess that maybe had some better support, but who knows? "You Must Be Good for Something's a good song.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But
And
yeah, but
yeah,
the rest of these songs are throw a lot of throwaway stuff. I mean
yeah.
that
I could put it on, and it's an album that I probably most enjoy if I'm doing other things in my home and it's playing in the background. I'm like, oh yeah, that's not a bad song. That's not a bad song.
All right.
You mentioned
Yeah.
the emptiness, and the emptiness. I have a love hate relationship with that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
a song where I don't know. It sounds so dramatic, because
Nice.
John is. I don't want to get sued here, but he's like the emptiness inside me. Oh, the emptiness inside me.
This
It's
is
over and
I.
over again.
Yeah.
And
And
I get that. I listen to that. I'm like, oh boy, he's really like, laying it on heavy there. But then, damn it, it's stuck in my head for the rest of the day. And then I want to go
it
play
will
the
be.
song again.
It will be. And but this is where the deterioration
Sorry,
of the
John, if you're listening.
relationship with Chris. Yeah. Yeah. But you won't put your lawyer's name on the bottom of the screen. You can't. But but this is where the relationship with Chris Bond deteriorates.
Oh,
Um,
okay. I was going to
yeah,
ask you when that
and
happened.
yeah, that deteriorates here. And they decided that, they really didn't like the whole revolving door plan of musicians coming in and out, and they would prefer to have put together a band. So they did select a few people and what have you who were with this because the next album is a live album, um,
Mm-hmm.
and that Lifetime, which is as far as live albums go, you know if you it's first of all the sound quality of it. If did you ever own it? The sound quality
I
of it's
didn't know. I've
remarkable.
just listened to it actually this past week for the first time while
Yeah,
I knew that we were going to be talking.
yeah.
It's, not fantastic.
No, no, it's not. And for somebody like me, and I know somebody like you who enjoyed them live, okay,
Mm-hmm.
you listen to this and you think back to those old videos of Music Laden and the whistle test and all
Mm-hmm.
those videos that you see back in the day. You know, you look at this and you say, yeah, you think you would get that feeling from it, but you don't. And it's just not a well-made. They must
No.
have picked the two worst shows they did to put this together.
Yeah, it was
Um,
recorded in actually a place that I used to go actually on school trips every year, Hershey Park, PA.
oh,
That's where it was
really?
recorded.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
It was over 2 nights, right? It was over
I
two
believe so.
shows, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that Hershey Park is not far from Pottstown, where Daryl Hall grew up.
Where Daryl Hall grew up, right?
Yeah, and actually, I had
And
read this. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. At the
no,
end
go
of
for it.
they do like an 8-minute version of Sara Smile on here, which
Smile.
Sara Smile is a great song, but I don't know if the world needed an 8-minute version of
Well,
that.
Well, if you ever went to shows on the Voices tour and Private
I did not,
Eyes and Fishbone
unfortunately.
tour, okay, you get 8 minutes of Sarah.
Oh,
And
okay.
okay, you not only get 8 minutes of Sarah, but
For the
this is
audio listeners, Dave is rolling his eyes there.
it's okay, and it becomes and we get to another song that's down the road, that it kind of one leads into the other, and it's very very dramatic, but we will get to that. So that's later on. That's later on. But the live album to me is, I mean, it was all songs we liked, but they just
Yeah.
weren't the best versions of them as far as I'm concerned.
No. Yeah, I don't know if the song selection was the best either. Like you had the emptiness on there, and I know that they were just touring, off of that album
That
that came
album, right,
from. Yeah,
right.
but probably the one that I liked the most on there was "Do What You Want, Be What You Are," the live version. That because the way Daryl got into it, it was kind of cool. It kind of reminded me of the live version of "Wait for Me" that ended up on the Rock and Soul album in the '80s, where you heard Daryl's the greatness that Daryl can sound like in a live show. I think that was probably the best example of it on this album, but it's probably not an album I'm going to ever spend too much
No,
time
I
on.
mean that's the live version on that one of "Do What You Want, Be What You Are" is very Motown. I mean, it has
Yeah,
a very Motown feel
yeah,
to that. I mean, he really, you could feel his influence with Smokey and the Temptations and the whole bit that he talks about at length for years. It comes through in droves on that song,
yeah.
especially on that live version. But short of that, it's not the best version of Rich Girl. It's not the best
No,
version like you said, 8 minutes of Sarah is more than enough. Um, it's not even John's best version of "I'm Just a Kid," and I mean, it's just not. "Room to Breathe" finishes it up. It's one of my favorite songs, but even the abandoned luncheonette on there is very calculated and not.
yeah. I was looking forward to hearing that when I saw it was on there, but I'm like, oh, I'm a little disappointed in that. It's just it's an underwhelming live album. They've got better
Very
live albums that
underwhelming.
came
Very
later.
underwhelming. That came later on down the road. So
Yeah,
moving
and
on.
Well, let's go to their next studio album, and that is one that I know. Even one of the first things that you and I ever talked about probably was this album because it's one of I know it's one of my favorites, and that is "Along the Red Ledge" from 1978. I remember when this came out because I remember loving the first single from this, "It's a Laugh," which was a hit, was a mild hit. You know, it's not one that shows up on all of their greatest hits compilations,
Mm,
but it did well
no,
for them, and I love "Along the Red Ledge."
me, me too. Along the Red Ledge is an underrated album. I mean, it's one that doesn't get enough talk about,
No,
doesn't get
it
enough,
doesn't.
they this is an extremely underrated album. David Foster takes over production, and
Yeah.
you can feel it's a much more positive feel to it. They're starting to get a band together that they're comfortable with a little more
Mm-hmm.
so. Um, the production quality is definitely taking a turn for the better. These are good songs. They're well manufactured, well arranged. I mean, just you could tell David Foster's arrangements are on these songs. George Harrison plays on this, right?
I just found that out today. I
Yeah,
never knew that until today. He
I'm trying.
plays
I
on
don't know.
The Last Time. He plays
The
guitar on
last
that.
time, yes, yes,
Yeah.
he's on. Yeah, he's on that, and it's not a long song, but he
No.
plays. Yeah, he plays on that. John had met him car racing because George had gotten into Formula One or something,
Oh.
and John
Oh,
and
cool.
yeah, yeah, and that's how. And then he said, "Could you?" And he was like, I approached George Harrison about playing guitar and he just said, he said, where are you guys recording? And he told him where. He goes, oh, you mind if I stop by? And George invited himself. And he's like, George Harrison's coming, right? And
Oh, that's
then
so awesome.
I guess apparently he was so kind to them, so unassuming, like George always
Wow.
apparently was, and he played his part and what have you. And he said, "Is that good enough?" And they were like, "Yeah, great." And he's like, "Okay,
Wow.
thanks, guys." Never asked for a nickel.
Oh, wow. That is
Yeah, that
awesome.
was there was
That's
a
really
lot of
cool.
beauty to that.
I've heard a lot
I'm
of
a
nice
huge
stories about George Harrison in that regard.
yeah.
I know I recently found out he played on a big hit that Belinda Carlisle had in the 80s or 90s. I think it was the Leave a
Of
Light
all
On.
people. Yeah, of all
Yeah,
people, right?
he loved playing. He would
Yeah.
go off and do
He didn't
different
care.
things, and
He didn't
yeah,
care. He just
yeah,
made fun to play someplace,
yeah,
which was
exactly.
great. I
And
love
like you say,
August
David
Day.
Foster produced. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Produced this. Oh no, God, I mean I love August Day. It's my favorite one
Yeah,
on
that's a
this,
great
by the
song.
way. Yeah. But yeah, you said David Foster produced it, and you could tell that they're now ready to be hit makers when David Foster shows up. Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, it's one of those things where the songs are going to get heard. Um, they're going to get made well, and they're, somebody's gonna play them someplace.
yeah.
And that's how I think It's a Laugh really started to show them up. I Don't Want to Lose You is a good, catchy song.
It is. It's a really good song. That was released as a single too. It wasn't a big
Yep,
blockbuster hit, but it was a
no,
good song that Daryl and John wrote together.
none of them were, but and they said, yeah, none of them were really. But
Yeah.
August Day reminds me a lot of the earlier stuff. It's very, a little primitive, and it's a little, introspective and what have you. Kind of has a Lily and Laughing Boy kind of vibe to it. I
Mm-hmm.
can definitely see myself in 1978 at 15 years old out in the backyard, all, my feet all dirty on an hot August day, and just remember this one. It
Yeah.
kind of just feels that has that feel to it. And yeah, I'm very fond of that song. It's a good song.
Yeah, there's so many. Oh gosh, there's so many good. Have I been away too long? I love Melody for a Memory. I love the harmonies
Is
between
a good one.
John
It's
and
very
Daryl.
a
Yeah,
wonderful harmony. That's a good choice, buddy.
we were
Yeah.
talking about I Don't Want to Lose You. Is that the one that there's one on here? I'm probably going to sound like a dummy if you don't know what I'm talking about. There's one where the beginning of it sounds a lot like "Say Goodbye to Hollywood," um,
Well,
with
it has
like the
that
drum and the
piano-ish
guitar.
kind of, yeah, the
Yeah,
drum and
almost like
piano
the "Be
kind of
My
mix.
Baby" and that kind
Yeah,
of
yeah,
similar
it
beginning. And
does. It
yeah,
does,
and I'm not saying anybody's ripping anybody off there, but I'm just thinking it's
No,
just
no,
a
no.
good solid song that
Solid song.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's got this
That's
classic
it's
classic
it's
feel to it.
catchy.
And
It
yeah,
really
it
is.
is. There's a lot of good songs in there. I don't know if you remember this. There was one song that we used to talk about in the H&O group that we belonged to, the Yahoo group, that a lot of people said that this was their least favorite song on the album. It was Pleasure Beach. That's a John Oates
Uh-huh.
song. And
Yeah,
it's a
I
fun
remember. I
song,
think
but
it is, but
it's kind of different than a lot of the other stuff. And John does that a lot. Or where John, I love John. I'm not knocking John in any way, but John will do things that maybe don't necessarily sound like they fit in with everything else on the album. Much
Italian
like
Girls for
Africa didn't.
openers.
Yeah,
Okay,
was
I mean
yeah,
Africa, Italian Girls.
yeah,
these songs that come out of Possession, Obsession. I mean, some of
yeah,
these songs that come out of nowhere with them,
yeah,
um, that are really good standalone songs, but they just
yeah. Don't
when you
necessarily.
that's not really fit in the. But apparently, Daryl loved Italian Girls, and that was one of his favorites, I guess, that he did it. But they do
I
that.
always thought that should have been a single, but maybe if we do a sequel
It
to this
was
one, we
in
talk about the
Canada.
eight. Oh, it
It
wasn't.
was in
Okay.
Canada. Yeah, it was in
And if
Canada. Yeah.
people who don't know, Italian Girls was on the H2O album,
H2O
and
album.
yeah, which is
Down the
yeah.
road,
Well,
long down the road.
we'll do a sequel to this at some
Let's
point,
finish
dude.
the seven. Let's
Yeah,
finish
let's
the
finish
70s.
this one. Okay,
Let's finish the
so we were
70s.
on their seventh album from the '70s, and that is "Along the Red Ledge" from
On that ledge.
'78. One of my favorites. If you folks aren't familiar with it, I encourage you to check it out.
Yeah,
there's
that's
really no
really a good
bad
one.
songs on it. Yeah, a
No, no,
lot of
that's
good
really a good one.
tracks. Have I Been Away Too Long? Daryl's vocals on that are just
They're
awesome.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's really by far their most unappreciated album
Yeah.
by
And,
far.
you mentioned the involvement of David Foster, where you think that that's going to bring them to maybe even new heights of fame. And yeah, it's a laugh, got some airplay, but it wasn't like the biggest smash hit album and didn't have multiple hit singles. I agree with what you said earlier. I think this should have been a more popular album than it was. And this was
Yeah,
not the last thing they recorded with David Foster. The last album
no,
that they did in the '70s was with him. That was in 1979, and that was the Ecstatic album, which it's not one of my favorites. I like some things on it, but
okay.
what do you think of the Ecstatic
We're
album?
gonna we're gonna we're gonna differ a little bit here.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna differ a little bit here. The only thing that the timing of Ecstatic is poor. That
Mm-hmm.
seems to be the thing about it. They're a little late to the dance party, okay? And
Yes. Yeah. Good
when
call.
you're right about it, 1979, where the dance party is starting to wrap up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And if they, this was an album they probably, if they were gonna put it out, probably should have been in place of Beauty on a Backstreet.
Yeah.
But you know,
Yeah. It would have
but
done
you know,
better
there
probably in '77 or
in
so than
77 or something because
yeah.
it was very danceable song and danceable music. I mean, all the songs on here, I like all the songs. The thing about it was that the influence of David, there was a little bit. First of all, they moved east. They started recording in New York,
Oh, okay.
which okay, and they took the band with them. David Foster produced, and Foster though I guess there was some tension. He wanted, because he had gotten in by that point really deep with Earth, Wind, and Fire a little bit, and
Oh, okay.
he thought that Daryl and John could could be a white version of Earth, Wind, and
Mm-hmm.
Fire. Okay, and he felt
I can
that
see
that's
that
where
they've
the
got the
direct
soulful sound.
very, yeah, very much. And I mean, so he tried to take it down that road, but he also was repping them because RCA and them and what have you were starting to say, listen, we're not children anymore. I mean, we could be producing ourselves and whatnot. And Foster just kind of said, yeah, you're not wrong. I mean, you guys are able, and
Mm-hmm.
you're not idiots. And he he really kind of laid that, he was there to supervise, but I don't think he was there to run the show eventually.
Right.
But the songs were written, they're danceable. I like the songs. I think all of them are pretty good. I got a partiality to a lot of them. I mean, I feel, I love Intravino, which was one of my favorites. Who Said the World Was Fair?
Yeah. That's
Is a good song. Portable Radio is very, very electric, very vibey. Wait for Me is a good song. The Woman Comes and Goes is a good tune. All You Want. There's really no bad ones. I mean, in
yeah.
my opinion, I like them. I mean, they're good. They're good songs that they would have served them better at another time.
I think you're right. And I think I didn't want to give the impression when I initially said that it's not one of my favorites that I hate it or anything. I agree with you. I think the majority of the songs on it are really good. This is
Yeah,
another
you
one
should have
too
just liked it.
but it's actually one that I really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to until maybe the last 2 or 3 years, and then I found myself listening to it more. And I don't know why. I don't know if it was maybe just because I was so wrapped up in maybe their '80s stuff then that I heard something like Portable. I remember really not liking Portable Radio the first time I heard it, but now I like it a lot. That's a good song, and I think that could have
Yeah.
been a popular song. That one, like you said, may have been better served if it had been released a little bit earlier
You
because
could
it's
see
totally
him
got a
played at like
disco vibe.
Studio 54, in the day.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? It would have done really well in an
yeah.
earlier,
And if
before Rubel and Schrader went to jail. I think it would have done a whole lot better. Um,
and I
you
remember
know,
hearing that before, thinking, if MTV had been around a few years earlier, I could have seen a good video for that and that song have becoming a big hit. It's a good song, and there's other, and like you said, "Wait for Me" is a great song. I knew first the live version from Rock and Soul from a little later on in the '80s. Um,
okay.
before I went back and bought the Ecstatic album, and
Yeah. Now,
the
Wait
studio
for
version's
Me.
great.
Yeah, and Wait for Me is the second end of the Sarah Antics live. Okay,
Hmm.
where at the end of the 8 or so minutes of Sarah live, Daryl goes into this very dramatic thing towards Sarah in the middle of it there, and the band is
Oh,
playing.
okay.
And then, especially in Voices in Private Eyes, there was an on the floor tantrum and yelling and screaming and the whole bit.
Oh, wow.
At which time he pops up after about 2 minutes of this, pops up and bounces right to the piano and begins "Wait for Me." And
Oh,
and this is why when you hear on Rock and Soul, the song starts with that very quick one note on the piano.
yeah, right.
Okay, that's him jumping up and actually just hitting that first note.
Oh,
It's
wow.
very sudden. It
Oh, how about
happens very
that?
quickly. Yeah, and if you ever watch the Rock and Soul video, the video, because the whole entire concert is available on YouTube.
Oh, okay. I've never seen that.
Yeah, it's really good, and you could see the antics, and that version that's on the Rock and Soul Part One is the one taken
Oh,
stripped
wow.
from the video. So
Okay.
yeah, so it's the exact same one.
I'll have to
And
look for that.
yeah, and you get a toned down version of the whole Sarah thing with Daryl. It's a little cut back just a bit from the Voices in Private Eyes
Uh,
era where it seemed to go on forever, whereas this
Wow.
one is a little more bearable. So yeah, that's
Oh wow, that's really interesting. And what are some of your other favorites? You might have already covered them, but
yeah. I
running.
mean,
I saw running. One thing that surprised me is I learned today that Running from Paradise actually did fairly well in the UK. It had made it up to number 41 there, and that's
Yeah,
that's a
it
pretty
had
good tune.
success elsewhere, which is good. Number one is a really good song. Number one feels like it was a song that probably could have gone back to maybe 75, um, a little earlier and everything. But All You Want Is Heaven is they're wonderful vocals. You know, very danceable kind of song. Bebop Drops. Yeah, I guess if I had to take one that I really, and Bebop Drop and Holophon are not
Yeah,
really are not really two of my favorites from there. But short of that, these are good songs, and they're good. It's unfortunate that that the timing was everything, but it also began to. It was a good album for them in the sense that they were able to push the envelope a
yeah,
little bit with RCA, and RCA was pushing back. I mean, they wanted some hits, and
yeah,
eventually when you and I do the '80s one, um, that's what transpires, obviously. But
yeah.
um,
It's a
but
big
that
turning
this
point.
is
This was the. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh no, you're right. This is a turning point. This is
Yeah,
this is well, and you know what's a turning point for music because disco's dying out, new wave is coming in, pop is changing. MTV comes out. All this happens like all in a matter of 2 years, and it changes
Yeah.
them, it changes everything, and it's how things went.
Yeah, and like you said, the production was going to change because this was the last with David Foster, and this was
Hmm.
also their first album with G.E. Smith, guitarist G.E.
G.
Smith,
Smith is on there first time,
who,
yeah.
yeah, and he ended up being, I don't know, maybe casual fans don't know this, but G.E. Smith recorded on really their what I think is probably one of the best run of albums ever by a musical act, and it was the four albums that came next. You had like just four, just I think they were probably all platinum selling albums, starting with Voices through Big Bam Boom. I think GE lasted through at least midway into the '80s. GE was with them,
Yeah,
maybe a little
GE
bit
GE
longer.
makes it GE makes it right to, I think, right after the Apollo, and
Yeah, yeah, the Live at the Apollo album.
and he leaves. But
Yeah,
the whole side, the backing band of the early '80s. Again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but the backing
that's
band of
okay.
the '80s, yeah, is basically, and I would arguably say, could have been a side band that could be considered for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
I
They were
agree.
that good.
They were that
They were
good.
that good.
It's
It
funny.
was
I
a
remember.
flawless band.
Yeah, I remember having even conversations in high school, like maybe after the Private Eyes album, saying that it's almost just a shame that it's not the Hall and Oates band. It
Right.
called that because you had.
Hmm.
I know I'm going to geek out, but I don't care. It's my show. You had G.E.
Yeah.
Smith on. You had G.E. Smith on lead guitar.
Hmm.
You had Tom T Bone Walk. Is that his last
Hmm.
name? W.
Hmm.
Yeah, on
Hmm.
bass. Charlie DeChant we mentioned on sax, and Mickey
Hmm.
Curry on drums.
Hmm.
And oh man, you saw them. If you watch the music videos from back then, they were featured prominently in them. They were all like they
Hmm.
were all characters in their own rights.
Characters
Very
in all the
entertaining.
videos. They're very much a part of things. I
Yeah.
mean, they're
And when I would see the live shows from back then, on video or seeing them once back then, they were just all amazing. And the plus they were the backing band too at the Live Aid concert for
they were the
like
backing
some
band
of the
for
acts,
Tina and Mick Jagger.
Tina
Yeah,
and
they
Mick
were the
Jagger,
backing band.
yeah, and
Yep.
just amazing.
Yeah.
And yes, we got ahead of ourselves, but still, that was the big turning point for them. Right after, well, with Ecstatic, but then a little bit past that, and we covered some really good albums there. A lot of great music.
We did good.
Yeah, we
We
did real
covered it
good.
all. Yeah.
We did. We got through the live one in there, the compilation
The
album in there,
Nation album, everything. We didn't miss a trick. We didn't turn. We
everything,
didn't.
Mr.
We
Legates.
didn't.
Yeah,
We didn't
that was a
turn. It
lot of
wasn't a
fun.
card we didn't turn over. It was a lot of fun, buddy.
It was a lot of fun, and I hope you had a lot of fun listening to this, folks. And I, I'm gonna put together a special article. I'm gonna write for Medium, kind of highlighting some of the songs that we talked about today, maybe, and make a playlist. So I'll have a link to that on the notes for this on YouTube and other fine places like Spotify and Apple and all that. But anyway, Dave, I want to thank you for your time. It's been a
Thanks, buddy,
blast
for
talking with
having
you.
me. This was great. It really
we,
was very
we're definitely
enjoyable.
going to have to do this again too,
We
and I'm
will.
going to
We will.
go into. I love the stories that you shared. I didn't know so much of that stuff, especially about that producer that they had the falling Christopher Bond. I don't know much
Yeah.
about him. I wonder what happened with him after Hall and Oates. I'm going to look that up
He
and
had a
see.
pretty. I think he had a pretty successful career. I didn't keep up with him, but he had a pretty successful career. He's a good studio man. I mean, one of
Yeah.
those people people
One
respect him.
last thing I want to ask you is,
Yes.
did you ever read John's book, Change of Season?
Yes. Yes, I
Yeah,
did.
I recommend that to people. John Oates a few years ago wrote an autobiography called Change of Season, and it covers his early years before Hall and Oates, but also his time with the band, and it's really good. You do see some really good insights. A lot of times, Daryl Hall is the one who gets maybe a little bit more attention because he's saying the majority of the hits, but it's always been a partnership. It's always been a duo, and John is. Oh boy, you can't have Hall and Oates without John Oates, and I like a lot of his solo stuff too. But that's another show too.
Oh, it's all for another day. Yeah.
But yeah, I highly recommend that book. Check it out, folks. And thank you for listening and watching Gotta Pop. Dave, thanks again for being here.
Thanks, buddy, for having me.
And everybody, I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care of yourselves. Have fun.